The next step that we're going to go through is we want to install our Cloud Control Center. So right now, the Cloud Control Center executables, or the installables rather, are provided on the Remote Support Platform installation. In a future release, they will be separated out, but right now they're on the RSP. And now I'm going to go and double check, have I set up all of my disk drives? Right, so in this case I've only got my C drive, so I have to go through the same process again. So it's the same scenario. Here I've got my second disk drive, but I've got to bring it online. I have to initialize the disk, and then I have to create my simple volume. Again, this will be drive E. Oops, forgot to give it a name. So I'll call it my data volume, perform a quick format, and that's now done. Alright, so I now need to copy across all of my files for my Business One OnDemand installation. As you can see, I am now connected to my machine that is going to host my Cloud Control Center. So I'm going to go in right now and I'm going to open up the area where I have stored all of the Cloud Control Center components. Now remember, the Cloud Control Center right now, as I mentioned before, is a subset of the Remote Support Platform. So I downloaded it, and I've put it on my SQL Server machine, and I've actually put it onto the G drive. So I'll need to use the hidden share for G, and there you can see there is my SAP downloads. Here I have my RSP 2.4 patch level 9. Now one of the other things I've also done in between the last recording and this recording is I have downloaded SAP Business One 8.82 patch level 9, and I've also applied that patch level 9 to my system. Now before in the session I showed you the upgrade process to patch level 8. So it's exactly the same, so I didn't bother to replace that, but I am now running on patch level 9. So here you have it. I've extracted out the RSP 2.4 patch level 9, and you'll see that there's a couple of different subfolders that are created. So I have the standard components for installing the remote support platform, but then you'll find here I actually have my folder called B1OD, and that's created when I've unzipped this compressed folder. So I'm going to go into the B1OD folder, and the first thing I need to do is I need to install this component, which is my SLD X64. So we'll go and we'll install that. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Run as Administrator. And you can see there's a couple of components that it has to install, the C++ redistributable and also my Java virtual machine, because all of the components of the Cloud Control Center require those. So I'm going to go and choose to install those, and we'll let that installation run. Now you can see it automatically kicks off the Install Shield wizard for the SLD. Again, same scenario here. What am I going to do? Where am I going to install this? Well, let's go and take a look at our computer, and you can see I've got my data volume, which is my E drive. Again, I'm not going to install anything on my C drive. So I'll go in here and I'll choose to put that onto my E drive. So simple, I'll just go here and I'll change the directory to E. I'll say OK, and then next. Now what it's going to want to do, it's going to want to have some Logon Credentials for the System Landscape Directory service. Now there's a couple of things that you are going to need to do before you install all of these components, but I thought I'd get to this point before I actually take you through and show those, so you can see how they work. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to connect to my domain controller, and I want to create a couple of groups, and then I also want to create a couple of user accounts which are going to be specifically for the use of the Cloud Control Center. So I want to create a group for my data center operators, and then I want to create a couple of accounts. I want to create an SAP service account, which is going to be the service account which all of the Cloud Control Center components utilize. And then I want to create a couple of my Business One Cloud Control Center administrators. So these are going to be the accounts that I use to administer everything from a Cloud Control Center perspective. Now remember, the purpose of the Cloud Control Center is to give you the ability to be able to manage your environment without ever having to go in and access SAP Business One. So you don't really want to be in the situation where you're having to go in and look at or encounter a situation when you might need to look at your customers' data, because what you really do want to do is make sure there is a complete delineation between system operation and system usage, and system operators don't get to access the Business One data, which of course makes all of your customers in the cloud environment feel much better, because obviously they don't want you going around and looking at their data. So I'm going to go in and log on to my domain controller, and I'm now going to create those accounts. So when we're in here, I'll go in to my Active Directory users and computers. Here I am inside my Active Directory users and computers. Now if I expand this group out, you'll see I have my users. So from here, what I want to do is I want to right click on users, and I want to create a new group. And my group name, I'm going to call this my Data Center Operators. And in this group, I want to add then the accounts that I'm creating. So I'll say OK to that. And then what I want to do now is I also want to create some users. So we'll create a new user. I'll do down here is I'll say this is my Data Center Operator 1, and I'll give it a user login name. I'm going to call it B1C ADM, and then I'm going to give it a password, and I'm going to just set a couple of these parameters, say next, and finish. Now the next thing I want to do is this Data Center Operator 1, I now want to add it to the group, and my group is Data Center Operators. I'll check names. It's validated that I've got the group name right, and that's it. So that user is now added to that group. So I'm going to create a couple, just so I've got a couple of different accounts there. So I'll just choose copy, and this one will be Data Center Operator 2. And of course, if I know the people who are going to be doing this, then I can put in their actual names, but I'm going to keep it fairly generic at the moment. So this will be B1C ADM 2. And next, again, put in my password that I want to use for this account. And because I've copied this existing account, which is already a member of that group, then this account will also be automatically a member of that group as well. And we'll create one more, Data Center Operator 3. B1C ADM 3. Next. Again, put in my password. And that's now done. Now there's one more account that I want to create, and that is my SAP service account, which is the account that I'm going to need to use during my installation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this one here. So I'll copy, and this one will be my SAP Cloud Service account. And I'm going to call it SAP Service B1C. Alright, and then I'll give it a password again. and I'll say next, and that's now done. One more group I do want to create is I do want to create a group which will be my service units. So again, I'll create a group here, service units. It will be a global group and it's a security group, so again I'll say OK. And that's so that all of the service units that I create will automatically become a part of that group. So that's now done. I'm comfortable with that. So let's now go back to our Cloud Control Center, back into my installation, and of course now I want to now use that account. So that's SAP Service B1C, and I'll put in my password. Now all of the Cloud Control Center services need to run with this username and password. Okay, so that's the reason why we have it created. So I'm going to need to use that again. So if I want to, I can get my Cloud Control Center to run with HTTPS. If I'm going to do that, then what I'm going to need to do is specify what is the certificate that I'm going to use. But right now, I'm just going to create this just to use HTTP, Standard Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which of course will run on port 80. So I'll say next. Now in the Cloud Control Center configuration, this is going to be running utilizing a Tomcat application container. So when I've got it running, it's going to want to know, how do I want this configured? Am I going to have other applications running? Do I want to bind it to a particular IP address? Which port do I want to use? The beauty of installing the Cloud Control Center on its own machine is, the way I like to set it up is that's the only service that's running on this machine. Okay, so you can leave all of these applications as default. So I'll say next. And then what it's going to do, it's going to want to create a new database. What have I done? As part of the preparation of this machine, I've already installed SQL Server Express Edition on this machine. So one of the things you'll notice, if I click here on Start and go into All Programs, you'll see I already have my SQL Server installed. But again, because this isn't going to be a huge environment where this database is going to get hit all the time and the databases are going to grow, then you can use SQL Server Express, which, as you know, is the free version of Microsoft SQL Server, but it does have data size limitations and so on. So I've done that, and that's the one that I'm going to use, and you can see this is the name of the database that it's going to create. So of course it wants to know my SA username and password. So I'll pop those in. It's just going to validate that. And that's it. Now, you'll see it's also wanting to specify a user to access the Cloud Control Center. And it's saying this user must be a member of the SBO Demo CL domain, which is my current user. And that's fine. So this is where I'm going to use B1C ADM. And then I'll choose install, and now the Cloud Control Center is going through its process of being installed. The SQL install script's running, that's creating the associated database with all of the tables. It's now installing the required Windows services, adjusting the firewall on the basis of what I put in for my ports, and the installation is now done. What's the next thing I need to do? Well, now I need to go and I need to install another component. So I'm going to need to install my System Landscape Directory agent. So I go in here and I'm going to run this installation process as well. Alright, now the agent is the process that runs in the background and actually executes all of the tasks. When I tell the system that I want to create a new user, when I want to create a new tenant and so on, it's the SLD agent that runs and does all of that work. So where am I going to install it? Again, I'm going to install this now in my E drive. So I'll say OK, and then next. Again, this is where I need to use my SAP service B1C account. So I'll put in that username and password. And I'll say next. And the installation is now running. This is where it now needs to know what the SLD URL is. So I'll put in http:// my local machine name, and again I'm not going to use localhost because I want this to be able to be accessed from the other machines, because you know, they're going to need to be able to point to this machine. So it will be SBO demo CLCCC, and it's :80 because that's the port number that it's running on. Then it's SLD, then /SLD.SBC. I just need to remember this because any time that I'm asked for the URL of the system landscape directory service, I must use exactly the same one. Okay, so then we'll say next, and then install. And my agent is now being installed, and then it will be started up as well. And you can see now it's been successfully installed, so I'll say finish. Next thing I want to do is I want to go and I want to install my user access portal, and I want to install that on my remote desktop server. This is going to be the portal that everybody sees when they log on. Now we provide an example portal, but it's all, of course, it's all branded up with SAP. So you cannot use that portal. We provide it as an example, and there's documentation which explains exactly how to customize that portal and so on. That's beyond the scope of this session to go into all the customization, but I'm just going to install that default portal. So I'm going to want to access this file, and I'm going to want to run it from my remote desktop server. So let's go here, and then I'll map out to that directory. So that's SBO demo CL/SQLA/G$, and press enter, and there it is. There's my SAP downloads again, my RSP, my Business One OnDemand, and there it is. There's my user access portal. So again, I'm going to run this as administrator. I'll say next. So what do I want to do? Do I want to install this for the remote desktop service, or do I want to install it for Citrix? So right now I'm just running remote desktop services, so I'm going to choose that. Where do I want to put it? Again, no, I'll stop saying this. Eventually I'll put that on my E drive, and I'll say next. My Logon Credentials for the remote desktop service application pool, and again I want to use my SAP service B1C account. Matter of fact, I must use that. Again, here is the URL of the system landscape directory service, so this becomes important that you remember what you did before. Right, so you'll remember it's SBO demo CLCCC :80 /SLD.SVC. And I'll say next, and next, and now it's going to install all the necessary components. And that's now done. So a couple of other things that you need to know now that you've gone through and you've installed your portal. Remember I talked about the SLD agent. Now the SLD agent needs to be installed on every single one of your servers. You can set up a group policy object that will automatically install that for you. Again, there is a process in the documentation which explains to you how to do that. I'm not going to take you through that. I'm actually going to go and do that on all of my servers manually because I don't have that many. But of course, as your environment starts to grow and you start to add more and more users and you need to scale out, it's going to be a lot easier to have a group policy object that pushes that out. The second thing you're also going to need to know is that, well, obviously the Cloud Control Center, as you've seen from my other demo, is a web-based user interface. Now, the only supported browser for the Cloud Control Center is Firefox. So you'll also need to install Firefox. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I've just downloaded the latest version of Firefox. I'm going to do a custom install. Again, why am I doing the custom install? I'm not going to say it, because you know by now. So I'll put that onto my E drive. I'll install the maintenance service, drop in my icons. And on this machine, I'm going to use Firefox as my default web browser. Let that install run. And now let's launch it. Not going to import anything. And here's my standard Firefox start page. So now, if I go to my local machine, so I can go to localhost, and you'll see it opens up the Cloud Control Center now for SAP Business One. So we now know that the Cloud Control Center is now working. So if I log in with my Cloud Control Center username that I've created and my password, and I choose Logon, what you should see is it will bring up the user interface for the Cloud Control Center. So that's the basics of actually installing the Cloud Control Center itself. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is now ready to go. There's a whole bunch of other things that I'm going to have to do in order to have my environment ready. And in our next section, that's what I'm going to take you through.